my name's Jennifer Anastasoff. I'm with the EnCorps Teachers Program. It's not EnCorps, it's EnCorps and Peace Corps. It's an important distinction that we've had to make over the years. What the EnCorps Teachers Program is, we're talking about design today, right, or at least in this session. So I'm going to back it up a little bit, and we're going to start at the end of the design stage, because that's the fun part, right? That's the part where you get to say, we all meant it to come out this way, right? So that's where I'm going to start, because that's the fun part, and then we'll get into the other stuff. So the EnCorps Teachers Program is essentially a domestic Peace Corps for scientists, chemists, and engineers to help them transition into teaching math and science in low-income schools. Okay? That's right. I said we want to try to get scientists, chemists, engineers, mathematicians even, to transition into teaching math and science in low-income schools. So that's what the EnCorps Teachers Program is. Perhaps we could call them geekstas, who are ready to transition into teaching. That's Bill Nye, the science guy, in case you're wondering. So starting at the end, a lot of what the EnCorps program has done over time is we recruit from HP, from IBM, from a variety of companies, as well as from professional associations, right? So the key question that has always come up, and I'm gonna throw this out here to you guys. So I want you to stand up. We just ate that really nice lunch. So those of you who think that the concept is the craziest idea you have ever heard in your entire life, please stand. Don't be shy. Come on, stand up. Stand. Craziest idea you've ever heard. Okay, you've heard some crazy ones. All right. Kind of an interesting idea. You have some questions about it. Stand up. All right, great. You can sit down now. Thank you. Didn't that feel good? All right. And for those of you who think, gosh, that's an interesting idea, that's a great idea, please stand. Wow. This is so different than when I talk to principals. All right, take a seat. Great. So that's exciting. So as you think about the current best program design, the current best program design for EnCorps is exactly this, where we go and recruit from these companies. And the idea is that we have a selection process. We then, after we select individuals using a rigorous selection process, we help them get into teaching by starting them for 3 months. First, once they get into the program, I like to call it dating education. When I joined Teach for America, I had to marry education after I finished my application. We find that people who are into career transitions really like to date education first. Okay? So we provide that opportunity so people, when they get into teaching, or when they start the transition, they start it with 3 months of tutoring in a school in a low-income community in which they might teach. Then they move. If we call it the bless and release, if they can't move any further, or if they decide that they only wanted to tutor, in fact, they thought tutoring was teaching, then they can keep, about 40% of those folks are going to drop off. We then bring them into about 3 months of guest teaching, which is sort of like student teaching light, which by the end they have to teach they have to teach at least one lesson, which you'd be surprised how many people have never stood up in front of a classroom and taught one lesson, just one lesson. And what it feels like, the difference that it feels like, if you can remember, if you're a teacher, that first time that you stood up in front of a class and how that felt, it's amazing. We anticipate that after that 6-month period, about 40% of our folks are going to decide that tutoring was all they ever wanted to do. They'll stay engaged in education, and it'll be wonderful. They've dated. They're going to stay there, not going to marry. About 60% we expect to then get into teaching in low-income public schools. Why? Because they've actually experienced it. They found it to be great, and they want to continue, and they're committed, and they've shown that they've been committed over time. So that's the end product, but gosh, how we got there is a bunch of sausage. So this is where we started. I was talking about opening doors, right? We started here with all the closed doors, okay? And those closed doors were actually from the education community, because there were a number of different programs where people had said, gosh, what would be really great? Started with the tech bubble. I'm sure it was even before that. But with the tech bubble in 99, 2000, a lot of people said, gosh, it would be so amazing. We have all of these people being laid off. This may sound familiar. All of these people being laid off. And they're really brilliant. Boy, they are going to be amazing teachers. Smart people plus students. Well, that equals learning, right? That equals learning. But they may have found out over time that maybe something was missing, right? And it led to some real challenges for folks. Folks who were getting into teaching for the first time, folks who, maybe had never experienced working with middle schoolers or high schoolers. It was a real challenge. So, and it was a challenge for the kids too. My first year as a teacher, they thought I was perky. So they said, oh, we're going to place you with the new guy. He's never had any experience with teaching. In fact, he was a real estate investor. He'll be great. Have you explained to him what teaching is? No. Okay. So after this happened in his class for the 5th time, and I had to step in as a 19-year-old, realized that's probably not the best path for the kids or for the teacher. So, we really started thinking about, when we started thinking about EnCorps, is this need to be just a little bit more explicit about that connection between, well, really smart people and students equaling learning. We needed to be just a little bit more explicit. So generally the way that folks had thought about it was these science and math professionals, there's a miracle, wah! And they then teach in a classroom, and it's great, and they're successful. So we looked at it actually as, people thought about it as an arithmetic equation, right? We really looked at it as an algebra equation. There's a couple of variables here, or multiple variables actually. So smart people minus y, we'll get into y in a second, plus x plus students equals learning. And the design part of EnCorps that was the toughest and most interesting, and continues to be the toughest and most interesting, is figuring out what that x and y is. Right? Figuring out what that x and y is. So if we start with the y, what does y equal? Y equals fear. So smart people minus the fear of kids. If you're afraid of kids, perhaps you shouldn't be teaching, but but I'll give you an example of that, of what that fear is. We had this great guy. When we first started the program, there were 10 people when we first started, and they have the bumps and bruises and scars to prove it. They call themselves very proudly pioneers. And they call themselves proudly pioneers because they know that they were the first, right? So one guy, was so excited about becoming a teacher. He was an engineer. He'd been good his whole life at whatever he did. He'd worked at one of the major companies in the Valley. And so he took all the tests, right? The CBEST and the CSET, and those of you in California, the Praxis exams, all of these exams that a lot of teachers find really, if you're transitioning, if you haven't done math, it's going to be pretty tough to take these tests. Aced them. Loved it. We find our folks love taking exams. Love it. They're so good at it. They can sit down in one session, take all 3 of them. Who cares? They'll pass it. It's great. And then, next to the exams, there's a great love for taking the classes, right? So then you jump in the credentialing classes and get to talk about what you would do in a classroom and what's the right thing and how you would do it, and it's really great. It's really comfortable. So, but what this nice and really excited guy, Dave, did was no matter what we did, refused, and he didn't do it overtly, but he just somehow never got into a classroom. Right? During that time period that he was taking the tests and taking the classes, he just didn't end up going to the classroom, right? Didn't end up volunteering. We had said you should volunteer, but for some reason he just didn't do it. And that's why, that's actually why part of the design process this year, actually starting earlier this year, we instituted the tutoring guest teaching and really solidified that as a key part of our design. That every single person who goes through this program, I don't care who you are or what you say you've done, you must tutor first in programs that we have seen, with people that we have engaged with, and you must then guest teach. For 6 months, you must do these things. Why? Because this great guy who really wanted to go through the process, ultimately he ended up never clearly getting a teaching position. Why? He couldn't answer that great question that every good principal asks, how are you going to do with my kids? I mean, he could talk about it, right? Yeah, I'll do really well. I think we could kind of do this. I have some great up here thoughts about how I might work with kids. But he couldn't talk about his absolute experience. So that's why, that's fear. The second one is misconceptions about kids, right? Misconceptions about kids, misconceptions about teaching, years of rote learning. Because a lot of our folks who are transitioning, they're in second, they're in their third careers, and they may, have spent their entire lives in a school system. I like to think, I often say that, gosh, you guys have missed that sort of engagement revolution, right? So we have to work with you on the engagement revolution. So smart people minus Y, we talked about that, plus X. What does plus X mean? Plus X means selection. It means making sure that we're not actually taking everyone in, because not everyone, and you all know this, not everyone should teach. And people figure that out themselves after they've been in a classroom for a little while. It's beautiful. They leave, they say, oh, you're okay if I'm not in the class, if I don't end up going into teaching? They love it. Why? Because we're not judging them for the fact that they decided that that's not the right path for them. It's not the right path for them. Or we can help them and coach them along the right path for them. Maybe they should be an after-school aide. Maybe they should be volunteering. Maybe they should do something with technology in education. Who knows? But if they're not right for teaching, then they're not right for teaching. So selection is a huge piece that we've invested a significant amount of time on, and we'll continue to do so. Connection. Connection with the kids, right? Connection with other teachers. An ability to connect with those in the education community, be able to bring some of your great knowledge, but understand that everything that you bring is not everything that you need. And in fact, there are folks out there in your school that can really bring knowledge to you and that you need to be reaching out to. And support. And this is something we've toyed around with a lot. When we first started the program, we thought, it's great. They're going to marry education. That was what we first thought. I know we realized dating was important, but we first thought they would marry education. And we provide them with counseling and support, marriage counseling first year. And it would be great. But it turned out, as many of you could probably go, oh yeah, absolutely. It turned out that that wasn't the most effective way. What they really needed was to hear from the kids.
I want to become a lawyer.
I'm hoping I can either be an animal cop or a veterinarian.
I want to be a biologist.
Engineer.
Designer.
I want to be a teacher.
I want to be a lawyer.
Science, I've always been interested in. I just want to know how everything works and what's in everything. And math, I like because of the teacher.
History is one of those classes that people just don't like, but I kind of like the teacher there.
I really like my math teacher, Ms. Caffarella.
Oh yeah, this class, Mr. Cacciati, he's the best teacher ever. He's so nice.
A good teacher always makes you feel confidence about yourself when there's an incoming test, and they inspire you to work really hard every day.
Bad teacher just sit back and let you do whatever, run all over, and pass you for nothing. And then a good teacher will sit there, help you do your work, tell you to do your work, and won't let you just run over them.
The last teacher I had was stubborn. She mostly didn't care that much. And this teacher actually cares about me and listens to me and helps me.
That's what all teachers are about. They make every student feel confident about themselves and care about their learning.
It's a rough world being a middle school teacher because you're going to have a lot of students. It's going to be hard to remember the names the classes and all that stuff, what you're going to teach.
It might be hard at first. You have to get your reading, your teaching credential, and different kinds of scholarships, but once you're done with it, it'll be worth it.
If you're a kind person and you love kids, then definitely you should become a teacher.
You're not going to be all judgmental and telling you that you're a bad teacher. Just stay calm, just work with them, have some enthusiasm, and they'll provide you with the learning. The teacher doesn't always have to teach the students. The students can also teach the teacher. So you gain knowledge in both ways.
If you're still nervous about it, well, just think positive and don't give up on what you think you could accomplish in life.
to share that last child, he's a great kid. The teacher who had been working with him right before this told me that the day before he was hiding in a closet. None of the kids came up with that on their own, all on their own. So that's what our folks needed to hear. The becoming a teacher through EnCorps piece, we try to fit, essentially we try to help fill that gap of where a miracle happens. And we're constantly working and changing as we talk about design. We're constantly working and changing. What does that middle piece look like? As I mentioned earlier, so what that ultimately ends up meaning is an EnCorps educator, they start off as tutors, that 3 months, they move to guest teachers, they then move to substitute or teaching full-time. So that's the process that we've ultimately come to. We've grown, it's great. So ultimately, as you think about those folks that you might end up working with, as you hear a mid-career person transitioning into teaching, A, make sure they connect with us, but B, we're also, and I'll be walking around throughout the next couple of days, please let us know what your thoughts are on the design that absolutely needs to happen. Thank you.